Good evening, everyone. Whew, it's so nice to see you all here, especially because this is it. This is the launch of the 25th season of Talking Volumes. Yes! We are so excited you're here. I'm Kelly Gordon. I am one half of the team that brings you big books and bold ideas from NPR News every Friday, the other half, of course, being our host, Kerri Miller. So I get to work with Kerri. I'm here to get you started. Just a few minutes, we wanted to thank our sponsors that are bringing this whole season to you. They are Becker Furniture World, the Duff Endowment, Episcopal Homes, and Lunds and Byerly's. They are supporting this celebratory season. They support us in all things books, and we are so really, truly thankful for them. I'd also be remiss if we didn't thank our partner in all of this, which is the Minnesota Star Tribune. And we have someone there. Erica Pearson is here tonight. She is a feature reporter at the Star Tribune, and she has some words for the book lovers in the audience.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's so great to see you. And while I have so many book lovers gathered in one place, I wanted to let you know about what we have coming up in the Minnesota Star Tribune. We have a Q&A with Minnesota's own Louise Erdrich and a review of her newest book, which sounds fabulous and involves a love triangle, a book club, and lots more. We also have a review of Kate DiCamillo's latest, and I wanted to mention both of those authors are coming to Talking Volumes, so that will be wonderful.
Yeah, we're so grateful for the joint partnership here in featuring especially Minnesota's own writers. Those are two here from hometown writers. So thank you for being here. Yeah, thank you, Erica. And with that, we'll get our evening started. We will welcome our host, Kerri Miller, host of Talking Volumes.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone, for being here. This is, I don't know if you noticed this, but I sure planned it this way. This is an all chicks, all the time extravaganza season. 4 magnificent women on 4 nights. I hope you have season tickets. It does not get any better than this. And I don't know if you've heard all the talk lately about glass ceilings and a certain history-making endeavor that's going on. It just seemed to really seemed to fit with the vibe. Now, before we bring our guest out on stage, I want to thank all of you who show up for these shows, neither sleet, nor rain, nor blizzards, nor locusts. I'm trying to think torrential downpours, have kept you away. And I really, really appreciate all the support over 25 years and the 20 years that I've been doing this. Thank you for bringing your curiosity and your adventurous spirit and your sheer book-loving passion to these conversations, these indelible nights. It's just wonderful to look out from the stage and see people out there loving it as much as I am. Through the season, I'm going to be mentioning some of the weirdest and most wonderful things that have happened on the stage of the Fitz, because why not? And here's one of them. I did not know much about Chuck Palahniuk. Was anybody in the, what? Yeah, you two? You guys? You were here for Chuck Palahniuk? Do you remember the weirdest thing that happened?
The Orange Beach Ball.
Yes, the Orange Beach Ball, Amy says. Does anybody else? Sir, do you? Okay. Do you remember that he brought little plastic baby dolls in a basket and he threw them out into the audience? And I didn't really see what he had in the basket, and he toted it out on stage, and at this opportune moment, he reached into the basket and just started pelting people with little plastic baby dolls. So I don't know if it's going to get weirder than that in this season. My guess is not. So, Edwidge Danticat is here to launch our season. Her new book of essays is titled We're Alone. Please welcome Miss Danticat back to the stage of the Fitzgerald Theater. Have you ever done an event with Chuck Palahniuk?
No, and I'm sorry I don't have tiny baby dolls.
What's the weirdest thing that you've ever brought along on a book tour? that maybe even the audience didn't know about?
Gosh, I don't, I guess my children.
Yeah. Her kids were here the last time Edwidge was here. And we were figuring out that they were, well, one of them's in college now, if that tells you anything. It was a long time ago.
Yeah. And actually people would, I remember, people would encounter this, like, this is a very ambitious endeavor. Because you're like, my husband was with me and like touting two young children. It was fun. We knew where all the good parks were everywhere we went.
It's great. Yeah. The weirdest thing is your kids. I like that.
Yeah, I now owe them extra therapy
from being out on the road.
For saying this on this radio in front of all these people.
What's the weirdest thing that's ever happened on a book tour?
I don't,
My children? No, just kidding.
No. I've had, actually, once when I was reading, it's like weird in a sad way. I was reading like kind of excruciating passage in my book, and then at some point I look and there was EMS picking someone in the, and it was like, oh my gosh, I don't think it had anything to do with what I was reading, but it was someone got very ill and then I didn't realize it was happening, so I kept going until they were like being wheeled out of the...
You struck someone down with
Gosh, I mean, the
reading.
Power of literature.
Right there.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever asked an author this, but when we were downstairs, we were talking about what's happened with book tours. What is your sense about what the book tour is for?
Well, I mean, my first book tours, I started touring really when I was 24, and I was with a small press, and a lot of the book tour was, I remember, like literally sleeping in the house of the rep from my publisher who had cats, and I'm allergic to cats, so we would go and pick up some Benadryl so that the cat wouldn't bother me. That's how I started book tours. And book tours back then you would do, I remember for Creek Crack I did 22 cities.
Wow.
And you kind of did it back and forth, and there were like wonderful people along the way who were escorts, who picked you up at the airport and took you around.
Helpers, not escorts.
Yes. That was the title, but it was just companions who took you around to like, and there were a lot of in-person interviews. Like you would go to, I mean, it was a whole day of interviews, and often. And then, you talk about the weirdest thing with book tour. So
I knew you'd think of something.
Yes, so you could do this all day, and then you show up in the bookstore, and it's like the bookseller, their mother, and your mother on the phone, and there was no one there. And at some point I said, every once in a while I would say to my publisher, why did we do this? Because 3 people showed up, and they said, well, you did the publicity, you got press, and in the town, and that was worthwhile. So the function, of course, is still, I think, is to meet your readers.
Right.
Which, writers, this book is called We're Alone. We're often alone when we're working. And so when you come out, you get to meet your readers, you get to see people, and then you go back to your cage. That's how
I've wondered if meeting the readers, and authors have a lot of different answers on this, but for you, does meeting the readers not influence what you're writing, but the way you're writing, kind of what you're imagining when you're sitting down to begin whatever project you're on? Or is that for the tour and that's over?
I mean, these days it's never over. I think just the way that, social media and everything works, and the way Goodreads and all of the power of readers now are ways to reach you. They can find your email, which sometimes is wonderful, other times not so much. If they have some things to say, like if they want to announce that they'll never read you again, they can, and you will actually get it.
Do you get emails like that?
Oh, I do get emails like that. Yeah.
What do you hold on? What do you think propels someone to feel like not only are they announcing it to themselves, but they have to tell you that they've come to this decision?
Yeah, I don't know. I once got one where the person is like, you should have never written this introduction to this particular book. And then I wrote back and tried to explain, and then they're like, you should have had your publicist write back because your explanation sucks. And then I decided, I was like, I will not reply again to these things. But I think, readers are passionate, right? I think it's comes from a kind of passion and people feeling like they know you in a certain way. So I think actually, in the process of writing, we have to make ourselves forget that there's people out there, because otherwise it's intimidating. And so it's always a kind of wonderful surprise when people come, right? When they show up and people who say, they've been reading you for years, and so that part of it is a really wonderful connection. There's a family here that I have a picture with the daughter when she was like a little girl, and she's now here again with her dad as a woman. So, hello, Millers. So, relationships like that is just it's really beautiful, because the people who are growing with you, as they grow with the work.
I'm struck by what you said by they think they know you. That's kind of the danger of social media. That's a bit of our celebrity culture, right? Just this kind of need to not just admire the work, but to puncture that kind of orbit that you live and work in. Yeah.
I'm not on social media per se. I do think there is an intimacy with, especially, with essays, for example, right? And there's a vulnerability. So you're in this kind of space together where someone is deep in your mind. And so sometimes having written a lot of nonfiction, so, after my memoir was published, Brother, I'm Dying, I would go places and people would start talking to me about my brothers. And I would be like, oh, so you know Kelly? And they're like, the book. And so there's even moments where I forget, you forget that there's certain things that you've written. So there's a kind of openness, of course we share what we want to share. There's plenty of opportunity, but it does create a kind of intimacy, especially if one does this kind of vulnerable, open nonfiction writing.
Yeah, two things about that. You make a decision when you write the kind of memoirs that you've written to let the world in on some of the most intimate moments, decisions, experiences in a family. And you did that, how many? Two memoirs?
One memoir and then 2 essay collections, like Create Dangerously, and then this collection, We're Alone.
So how does that sit with you?
I'm fine with it, because I think you have to be vulnerable to tell a kind of truth that reaches beyond your comfort zone. And one of the reasons I write essays is because I don't want to sort of shield a lot of the true stories I feel like I need to tell in my fiction.
Why, and why not?
I do some, there is some overlapping, but I want to have that space to just make things up, even if they come from a seed, like an original seed of, truth. So I want to kind of let my imagination go a certain way. I want to have this other space where I can write my opinion pieces. Actually, I have an opinion piece coming out tomorrow in the Washington Post about what's been happening in Springfield.
Oh,
so
yes.
Look out for that. So I that gives, there's like that space for me. It's, in the introduction to We're Alone, I borrow an expression from a Haitian artist and anthropologist named Gina Athena Ulysse, where she talks about something called rassemblage, which is a reassembly, right? And I like the opportunity to do that in a separate sort of room or space than my fiction.
I wondered if this feels like a moment where, in your own writing, fiction didn't feel as necessary and nonfiction and these essays felt more needed.
Mm-hmm. Well, essays always feel, there's always a kind of urgency for me to the essays, to the point that sometimes I realize, like, when I approach a publication in these moments where, like, I want to write something, I always feel like I'm asking them to do me a favor, like, publish it. Because that sense of urgency is always so pressing and with essays, because you're responding to a particular moment. Not all essays, but the kinds that sort of like the kind of opinion, which I try to do as both reflection and like reporting, like in a specific, like in this kind of way that I like to do it, where I bring in other voices to what I'm writing. So that always feels extremely urgent. And then the fiction, you have to sit with for much longer, even though you sit with the nonfiction too, but the fiction you have to sit so long that you have to, out of this seed of an idea, has to now emerge people, right? Characters, and that takes a lot longer. So for example, when with my memoir, Brother, I'm Dying, when my uncle died in immigration custody, my dad was sick at the same time, and my daughter was being born, and people would always ask me after it was published, like, why that couldn't be a novel. And I was like, that book, writing it was like visiting with my uncle and my dad after they passed. There was something so urgent about, like, being in the real, the actual reality of that moment, that it would have taken me 10 years to write that as fiction.
Wow. Wow. You describe yourself as aspiring to be a witnessing writer, a description that James Baldwin applied to himself. I'd like to know what that means in this era, in this point in your career. So in the time that we're in, but also at the place in the arc of your career that you're at.
I think I've always, in some ways, aspired, even when I was starting out, to witness in the way, Baldwin describes it as someone who describes from whence I came, right? Like, that is the starting point. And from whence I came was such an important part of my even, coming to the US at age 12 and learning English and adjusting to life. And at that time, it was still the dictatorship, the second half of the Duvalier dictatorship, and my parents living in Brooklyn with parents who were always looking back, because we had family members. And so that idea of from whence I came, and the from whence I came, where it was always kind of, you had distance as the years were going by, you had more and more distance. And so the documentation of that, the remembering of that, seemed so much more important to actually recall, and because my years at age 12, my years in Haiti were just staying the same, which, and then my years here were just adding up. And so what do you keep from that? And then when I went back, of course, was just like soaking everything in, that idea. And then there were also things that were happening in the community that I just wanted to put down in my work, whether it was fiction and nonfiction. So I think of it as that kind of witnessing. I pull back a little bit because some of these terms have gained so much more weight in terms of like bearing witness, but I just in terms of like the witness, and then almost like a documentarian is how I see it.
As I was thinking about this, I was wondering, what if the witnessing and the testimony that comes from that witnessing doesn't alter perceptions? I mean, that seems to be the push and pull we're in right now, right? I have a story and it comes from experience and my life and something to say about that, and how do I make that testimony important and heard, I guess. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I see, when I'm together with writer friends now in this period of time, where we do talk about, like, there is a kind of your faith in the ability of art to change people's hearts,
Right,
is sort of diminishing a little bit, because people are just so kind of strict about where they are at. But I think that goes back and forth for me. Sometimes I'm a big evangelist of that, of the power of literature to move and to change hearts. But often I think people have to be willing. You have to be open in general to being moved, right? And so, and are we already talking to converts, right? I go back to, I think about, Toni Morrison saying that Tolstoy didn't know he was writing for a little black girl in Lorain, Ohio. And I think, Toni Morrison didn't know she was writing for a little black girl from Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And, the Haitian writer, Danny Laferrière, he has a book called I Am a Japanese Writer. And people would say, okay, Danny, you're a Japanese writer. He said, well, I'm a Japanese writer because I take on the nationality of my readers. So when a Japanese reader reads me, I become a Japanese writer. And he came to that, he said, because when he was a little boy in Tigouave in Haiti, he says, when I read Shakespeare, Shakespeare became a Haitian writer, and then he said, otherwise, what was he doing in my room? And so that idea of, sometimes that to me is, that the possibility of that is so powerful that it sort of keeps you believing and still in like the power of literature in that way.
So this piece that you've written about what is being said about Springfield, Ohio, where will it appear?
In the Washington Post tomorrow.
So, what if? Do you want to tell me a little bit about what you're saying, and then I'll ask you.
Well, I wanted to. I've been sitting with it all week. I'm not like a quick response person, and often there are things definitely that demand a quick response. But I always want to, when I think about writing this kind of piece, I always want to think about bringing in like different voices. So I was talking to folks, some folks that I happen to know who are actually long-term residents who are Haitian Americans of Springfield, Ohio, and then also, so I talk about at the same time like how long we've had anti-Haitian like prejudice in this country, starting from the Haitian Revolution when Thomas Jefferson called us cannibals of the Black Republic, and throughout like the 80s, when Haitians were the only people by nationality identified as being at high risk for AIDS.
Right.
And then all the cyclical nature of that. And now when you have this brew of, like in a xenophobic approach to winning elections, we're just kind of like, boom. And so, and also talking about some personal experiences, like things my family experienced in that brew. And part of it is also thinking about ways that, and different groups have to do it at different times, but because I'm Haitian American, that's like so my experience too. The burden of any group of people constantly having to proclaim your humanity.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Would you say a little more about that? About the burden of that?
Just to be, to not have the lack of assumption that you are human, even the accusations, right? That, okay, that like these tropes, but the accusation like, you are so, like, you eat dogs and cats, you steal things, like, just like to the dehumanization of that. And then, Toni Morrison has this wonderful quote, that thing that she said at a lecture in the 70s, where she said, the serious, I'm paraphrasing, like, the thing about racism is that it's a serious distraction, and that it keeps you from doing your work. Because if someone says you have no language, then you've spent years trying to prove you have a language. That level of, this level of the burden of having like to prove your humanity, in the sense that when there's so many other things that you could be doing.
What I thought about when you were describing this was how impossible it is to prove a negative, to prove that you are not the other, when all of the discussion wants to make you the other. It's almost impossible to say, but we are not the other, we are you.
Mm-hmm. And as Morrison says that in that paragraph too, is that there's always going to be something else. There's a kind of forced futility in the chase.
Right. We're talking about this because of what's been in the news, but also because America is a place that, witnesses many different kinds of immigrant stories, and it's a country that is clearly ambivalent about that, about some of those stories. Some of those stories pass muster, some of them do not. Do you ever think about that? Why are some immigrants' stories celebrated, accepted, not otherized, and some are not?
The simplest thing is like the most obvious is race, of course. I think especially in this particular case with Haitians, it's like a brew of xenophobia and racism together. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's some very also scapegoat, like demonizing immigrants is often, like that often comes up in elections in different places. But I think certainly race and a certain, histories, place has a lot to do with it. Race has a lot to do with it. And also class, too, right? Because if you come with a lot of money, then it's easier to resettle in a different country.
You write in this collection of essays, We're Alone, when my older daughter Mira was born in Miami in 2005, I remember thinking that after nearly a quarter century of living in the United States, I finally had an unbreakable bond with the place. It's a long time to not feel that you were home. So if you'll speak to that, and then I have a question about this latest discussion, mm-hmm. and how that's affected that perception.
Well, for a lot of that time, I was told that I didn't belong. In the AIDS conversation in the 1980s, we were told we had dirty blood. We were told we were, dirty Haitians, and then, and in that time that my uncle died in immigration custody. So there were things that, that forever kind of like this idea of being a forever stranger.
Yes.
But then there's something to seeing like a new generation of your family come to. So, it's like when my nieces were born and when my daughter was born, like for us who were, I have two brothers who were born in the US and two of us who were born in Haiti. But to see like a whole new generation of your family emerge who have not been to Haiti, who only know America, and so to see like, wow, you start then contemplating what their relationship with the place will be. Like in the way that an immigrant household, you have sort of like 1 foot here, 1 foot, in and out, because you're living with parents who speak Creole, who are sort of always partly in Haiti. So I was thinking, wow. I mean, I also was thinking, I thought this too, because these things happened in the same year when my daughter was born and my father died and was buried in Queens. And I thought, I think that was a combination of that thinking, like, well, maybe the living are easier to go with, but my dad is buried there now, so I also have that sort of tie to the place in the way that, in 100 Years of Solitude, that one of the characters says, like, you don't belong to a place until you have someone buried under, in the ground.
But feeling at home denotes that there is also acceptance, a welcoming. That's the other side of the equation, isn't it? Of home?
Yeah. I mean, it feels also there's like a futurity, like as you said, like a future in the sense that suddenly I start thinking of the possibility, like, I might become a grandmother in this place, that suddenly it's sort of like, that's the way that happens when one has children. Like suddenly you feel like, oh, the future has just stressed like a little bit further along before me. Like I don't know if I'll see it all, but there's like a human who will just kind of travel in my lineage, but in their own path in the future ahead.
But when you've come from somewhere else and you feel at long last home in this place, what I was asking is, what if the place isn't accepting and welcoming? And I guess I wondered if you've been reminded of that yet again, about how quickly this home can turn, by this discussion that's going on about Haitians in Springfield, all legal, by the way, all welcomed by the government of Springfield, eating cats and dogs.
It did. I mean, it reminded me, like in this collectivity, like exactly, you're saying how fragile that is, right?
Exactly.
And one of the things that that is very precarious for immigrants, especially newly arrived immigrant, this idea, and as hearing you say it, it's just, it brought it home again, this idea that we don't always get to decide
right.
where we call home. It's decided for you
right.
in a lot of cases. And that could be whether you're in the place where you were born, like Warsan Shire said, no one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark, right? And so that this idea that you don't always get to decide that, whether you are in the place where you're born or whether you're in this new place, when you're in this precarious condition, like in situation, for example, that a lot of the families, the newly arrived families in Springfield are now. So, I mean, I think that sometimes can go, generations where you think, oh, I thought I was home, but this person who has more power than, thinks that this is not my home, and they have actually the mechanisms to make that, to disavow me of that notion.
Do you think your daughters will ever feel that fragility, that precarity?
I think they've watched, and my daughters are two, have watched, sometimes we've been in a household with two generations of, their grandmothers and us, and of course the grandmothers. My husband's mother actually has been the the more recent portal for us to go back to Haiti, because she goes back and forth. She has a home there. They've been able to go there. So I think they can understand that, that precarity. But, and, you know, now I was, you know, last night, one of my daughter who's in college was like, she went to a meeting of the Haitian Club, and her father and I were like jumping up and down so much, or like, and then she said, you know, that they were trying to figure out as young college students how to combat the stereotyping. So I think that's what this week so many of us, because I went through it as a child, like being called a dirty Haitian, being called like names for being Haitian. Like a lot of us this week are thinking about these children, you know, that next generation, the children in Springfield for sure who can't go to school because of bomb threats, but also what that will mean. Are we, you know, like I'm 55 years old, like this happened to me, in my own way when I was 12 years old.
Right.
And now you have a whole new group of young people who are experiencing that, and it's very tragic, and you know, in so many ways.
Weren't you also beaten as a child because you were Haitian?
Yeah, we were like we were called names, or yeah.
I mean, you wrote about some of that. As you say, that happened when you were 12.
Yeah.
It left an indelible print on your soul, I would think.
Oh yeah, I mean, then that's why, you know, it's making me. I mean, I'm thinking of a lot of, you know, the young people like who are coming to the U.S. now. Some of them on the humanitarian parole. Some of them with their parents who have been through the Darien Gap, which is, you know, this sort of impassable journey on foot, who speak multiple languages because their parents might have been in Chile or Brazil before they went, you know, they came to the U.S.-Mexican border, who have been through that journey,
Right.
who've also experienced so much, and then now, you know, are also experiencing this. So that's one of the things that preoccupies me a lot also as a parent, you know, in terms of like what that means for young people now.
Right. I want you to read an excerpt, but before, and this is a part of an essay where you talk about what Toni Morrison has meant to you, but how do you think reading Toni Morrison made you feel more at home, more of an American?
You know, when I started reading, when I came to the U.S. at age 12, there was this library, the Brooklyn Public Library, near my school, and I remember going there. And at first, because I didn't read English, I just was consuming all the books on, you know, Haitian writing, French writing, and I was just reading. I was reading in a way to go back to Haiti through books. And then when I started reading African-American writers, you know, like Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, Maya Angelou, they were like a bridge to me. You know, it was, and Paul Marshall, who was also, you know, Caribbean, Audre Lorde. It was like, oh, come, you know. And I remember in high school being given this book by my history teacher, Mr. Casey, who gave me Mary Evans' book, Black Women Writers. And that really was like an extraordinary bridge, in the sense that it's like, wow, first of all, you can do this. And then I think my idea of like African diaspora started forming from that, right? Mm-hmm. That we have had, we landed on different continents, we speak different languages, but that there's this common thread that made it seem possible for me to become a writer.
Okay, if you'll read this part of the essay, and if you want to say anything about the essay beforehand.
Yeah, so this essay this is part of an essay called Traveling With, and it has some of my favorite writers. And so in this moment, in this excerpt, I'm talking about, I was asked to speak at Ms. Morrison's memorial service, and you asked how she made me feel. Like, so today I had I'm on a group chat with some Morrison scholars, and
Oh.
I was asking them, like, because I quote this about distraction in the piece that I wrote, and I
For
was
the Washington
yeah,
Post.
and I was
Yeah.
asking them. And then one of them says, "So it's true. We all we eat, sleep, and eat Morrison."
She's always with us.
She's always with us. Yes. So she was with us in a very specific way that day. This is from about her memorial service. When I was asked to speak at Ms. Morrison's memorial service at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City on November 21st, 2019. A service that also included the writers Jesmyn Ward, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Michael Ondaatje, and Oprah Winfrey. I began to see her and aspects of her work everywhere. I saw her in bleak and sunny skies. I saw her in daisy trees. I saw her on benches by the road. I heard her voice in church hymns, spirituals, and jazz tunes, because she was, as she wrote of Jadine and Tar Baby, not only a woman, but a sound, a world, and a way of being in it. I kept seeing her too in shiny, beautiful hairpins woven through gray locks. Each time she'd given me one of those hairpins, I felt as though she was sharing pieces of her infinite crown with me. I felt her presence in her sister writer friends, Sonia Sanchez and Nikki Giovanni, and Black women writers closer to my age and younger, like Jesmyn Ward and Tiari Jones. Though she carried a particular strand of genius in every single cell of her body, she had constantly reminded us that it is indeed not scarce, and that we too could skillfully, beautifully, and politically tell our stories. This had made it so much easier to tremble less in her presence because, quiet as it's kept, she half giggled when she laughed and had a sparkle in her eye when she was in the presence of someone whose company she enjoyed. She drank vodka on a cold day, the really good stuff, and smoked cigarettes at the Louvre. She was the literary giant that is Toni Morrison, but she was also Chloe Warford, and she allowed me in brief, privileged moments to see them both, for which I will always be grateful. Her work was, of course, sublime. We did not just read it, we experienced it. She gave us both lullabies and battle cries. She turned pain into flesh and brought spirits to life. She urged us to be dangerously free. She gave this foreigner a home. Her work has carried me through adolescence and marriage, parenthood and orphanhood. I have recited and paraphrased her sentences to myself while cradling the tiny bodies of my newborn daughters and the skeletal faces of my dying parents. I hope that, like baby Shugs, they too would die soft as cream, soft as cream. And I came to think of her, as she wrote in The Bluest Eye, as someone, as not only a friend of my mind, but as someone who does not want me to die. Death is as natural as life, she wrote, and you sure did live in this world, I said in the church that day. Some called her sister, soror, others called her teacher, editor, beloved, and mentor. We'll still call you by those names, I said, but now we also call you timeless. We now call you ancestor.
I was driving real slow down a one-way street with the needle on empty, trying to make ends meet. I'm just trying to get home in one piece to my baby tonight. Got a little bit of grass in my front left pocket, case of beer in the trunk. You need a key to unlock it. I'm just trying to get home in one piece to my baby tonight. Isn't it strange how a minute might change your whole life? One wrong move and a man might turn out your lights. Flashing lights in the rear view, I'm getting pulled over. I'm so tired of being black and looking over my shoulder. I'm just trying to get home in one piece to my baby tonight. And he asks for my license, checks my registration, and I try to keep calm. I try to keep my cool weight, and I'm just trying to get home in one piece to my baby. Isn't it strange how a minute might change your whole life? One wrong move and a man might turn out your lights. I'm not trying to just get by. I'm not trying to just survive. I'm just trying to live my life. I'm just trying to live. Comes back to the car, he keeps a hand by his side. He says, son, you seem nervous, you got something to hide. Said, I'm just trying to get home in one piece to my baby tonight. And he stares for a moment, says, have a nice day, tips his hat with a smile as he's walking away. And I'm just flying to get home in one piece to my baby. Isn't it strange how a minute might change your whole life? One wrong move and a man might turn out your lights. Isn't it strange how a minute might change your whole life? One wrong move and a man might turn out your life. Isn't it strange how a minute might change your whole life? One wrong move and a man might turn out your lights. Isn't it strange how a minute might change your whole life?
Laamar. Thank you. That was wonderful.
That was gorgeous.
Tell me a little bit about writing the song.
Well, I think like Edwidge said, the ability of art to change hearts. It's really the goal, I think. Trying to encapsulate an experience which I think is universal for a lot of people of color and put it into a piece of art that creates some tension and creates some emotional connection, but doesn't have the climax you might expect.
Right.
Yeah.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're listening to Talking Volumes from the Fitzgerald Theater. Our guest is Edwidge Danticat. Her new book is titled We're Alone, and I'm Kerri Miller. So the 100th anniversary of James Baldwin's birth was observed this year. I've been reading a lot of the remembrances, and this popped up in one of them that I thought was so contemporary and so relevant to the kind of, the pain of the division and the divisiveness that we're living in. James Baldwin wrote, "Walk down the street of any city, any afternoon, and look around you. What you've got to remember is what you're looking at is also you. Mm-hmm. Everyone you're looking at is also you. You could be that person." What does that say to you?
Beautiful. I mean, it says to me that so much. It's kind of like these writers left us a blueprint, like a blueprint.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's how it should be, right? And again, like circling back to art. I mean, it's what's the greatest act of empathy is to be able to see yourself in another human being. And so I think that's like a really wonderful aspiration, much needed for the moment.
Baldwin wrote an extraordinary letter to his nephew, James, and he inspired you to begin your own letter to your daughters. It sounds like the letter is still in progress.
Yes. It's interesting because I have a friend when, after the essays were put together in the book, who said maybe the book is the letter. And, as a lot of the parents here know, to this, you never feel like you stop parenting. I feel like my mother and father, I feel like they are still parenting me from the grave sometimes.
Really?
Because there are things that, that they might have said, like in passing, that's still like, oh, that's what that was told to me.
Right.
So it's definitely in progress, my letter to my girls.
How far along are you?
I don't think it will ever end. I mean, like my young one, sometimes when I said, I'm going to put this in it's an actual little notebook that I just write things now and then. And sometimes I'll say things like, you're your best thing, like quoting the Morrison, and they're like, cringe, like.
Wait a minute, have they read part of it?
Yeah, they've read little bits of it, because also like what I do is I'll like, I still do like the terrible things that parents do, like you'll send like things from YouTube, like, or these like Canva things with like 10 things to do. I still do that, but I take the extra cringe step of printing it out.
Oh no!
And pasting it to my little notebook.
Oh no!
Because I'm like, one day you'll appreciate this.
You know what I wondered about this is maybe the letter, you hesitate to finish it because in some ways you don't want your daughters to need it, right?
Absolutely. And this is something that I, like when my mother passed away when she was living with us. She was living in New York and I was living in Miami. She came to visit, and then she was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer, and she died in the house with me and the girls. And when my mom passed away, I realized she was keeping this cassette that I wasn't aware. Wow. Like she was speaking in the cassette, and some of them were profound things, but a lot of it was like, "Don't you dare wear open-toe shoes to my funeral." And
oh my gosh.
It was like very, and it's kind of like I have $500 in the mattress. It was things like that. It was really, really funny. I wrote about in a book called The Art of Death. So it was. I think I learned like from the idea of the cassette, and I literally had to, every time I see a cassette I have to learn how to transfer those cassettes because there's still cassettes that I play on that machine.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh.
because I don't know how to transfer cassettes yet because I don't know if you go cassette, CD, and then until like I don't. It seems like a long journey.
Right.
To the USB thing, but that idea of like having something like some instructions left behind is very powerful. It feels morbid at times, but it's kind of like, yeah, I don't want to. I felt very grateful that with both my parents, who both had terminal diagnosis, and had, they were very, and they would say it like, once we got past, like, so when I stopped having this conversation with my parents where they would say, when I die, and I'm like, no, you're never gonna die. Once I stopped myself, when they said, when I die, and I would say, well, what do you want us to do? Then it opened this great possibility. And then both my parents, when they were very close to death, said that they had nothing left unsaid.
Wow.
And it was very beautifully liberating, something to witness, that someone to go into their next stage of, to go into that space unburdened, like completely unburdened. So that kind of inspires this constant letter writing that I'm doing.
I think that is rare, that people feel that when they're ready to leave this world, or they're leaving this world before they're ready, that they have said everything they feel like they need to say. That says something, I think, about the nature and character of your family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think too, like I said, I realized I caught on to it. It's like, again, when we were saying with the being open, I think that you have to be able to get past that feeling of denial.
Right.
It takes a long time to then be able to have those kind of conversations. And both, I mean, I write about this in Brother, I'm Dying, when my dad was like, everything was a meeting. So my mother did cassettes, but my dad held a meeting. And he was like, so this is what we're going to do when I'm dead. Like, that was a meeting.
Really?
Yeah. And so once, I think, just being able to accept that conversation can happen, like, open these doors, I think, for our family.
I mean, it's. I wanted to ask you about the title. It can be bleak. It can be, I don't know, in some ways uplifting. I saw a lot of dimension in that. I wondered how you thought about what you were going to call this.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't expect, like, when I have conversation with friends, they're almost, a lot of them are like, in spite of the title.
Yeah, right.
And I really did not see that coming, but I should have known, because actually in Creole, it's like, nous pour compte nous, like, you're by yourself. Like, that's like one of the, like, really, But you're by yourself when? The title, like, my intention with it was, first of all, it was drawn from this poem by a Haitian poet, Roland Chassagne, who did die by himself. He died in prison during the dictatorship. But it's this idea of a writer and a reader being alone together. So there is also, like, we're alone in the sense that no one is coming to save us. We have to really, like, call on our, like, your inner resistance and resilience, because you're on your own. But what I was thinking more was that this idea of, like, the intimacy between a writer and a reader, and that we're alone together. Because those were, for me, my most exciting reading experiences. I grew up in a family where there were some really lively storytellers, people who could perform stories, who were not readers, but were really, like, they can tell you a story, like, all day, and you would still be captivated. And I admired that, but I was like, I can't do that. I'm this shy girl. I want to. And then the moment, like, my uncle Joseph handed me a book when I was 4 years old. It was the Madeleine book, in the house in Paris, in French. and I like went to the corner with that. It was just like, and I was like, oh, like whatever this is, I want to do it, like, because this is just mine, and I can take this wherever I go, and I'm always alone with this thing, this person. So that's the way I was thinking about it, this relationship like between a reader and a writer, a kind of intimacy, this alone togetherness.
It makes sense, but I've pondered it quite a bit because I don't think of you in any sense as alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm
your
Haitian.
ancestors,
I cannot be
yes, right?
Yeah.
You see why that seems.
Oh no,
yeah.
absolutely, yeah. And that's one of the things, like I said, when my friends would say, they would, where they were like, well, we can't be alone. Our ancestors are with us.
Right.
But that's the way I was thinking about it. And it also draws from this beautiful poem too that I came across. It's called Plage, and it's describing a person alone on a beach at night, and even that aloneness is also submerged into like an appreciation of the immensity of the place that you're in and the beauty of the place that you're in and that connection to that place. And we do, as writers, this is solitary work. So you're physically alone a lot doing this work, right? As you try to, and you need that solitude. You need to be alone to kind of evoke the stories, evoke the spirits that, the voices that you want in there. So there's all kinds of layers of aloneness. It's like Camus. In the French, you have solidaire, solitaire. It's very close. Solidarity and solitude.
Yes.
And French, solidaire, solitaire. So it's kind of that kind of aloneness. Like that's just an aloneness and a togetherness at the same time.
Louise Erdrich is going to be here in a couple weeks, and I was reading back into some deep interviews of hers to prepare, and like, I don't know, 25 years ago, she was talking about how she had needed solitude. She just found herself as somebody who reached out for solitude much more often than she thought she would, even at that age.
Mm-hmm. I think that this work requires solitude. I try to make, like in my life, because that's why I was traveling with my children, this very specific choice of like allowing them to flow in and out of like even the space where I work, because I feel like I needed that, like to feel like I had my foot in a real life. But it does require, I mean, I worked at night a lot too, to kind of be alone, to like to remove like other possibilities of doing other things. So I didn't even realize like that part of working at night, part of writing at night was to kind of create that solitude in the middle of a busy life too.
Right. Before you read the last excerpt, and it's this lovely passage about your mother, I just thought I'd love to know a little bit about your decision to write about her, even though I think you concede she would not have wanted you to, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. She. So my mother loved the sort of the things on the margins of being a writer. She loved to travel with us. She loved to go to some of the parties, and if she were here, like I would introduce her, and she would love that. But she always said, like, don't write about me. So in my memoir, people would say, where's your mother? And then I said, well, she didn't want to be in the book. She...
but why? Why do you think that is?
Well, she had one very terrible early experience. When Kika came out, there was a mother who secretly plays the lottery. And so one day, I was home, she's like, ladies at church thinks I play the lottery because of your story. And that was very sinful to her.
Oh, really?
And I would joke with her. I said, well, they probably want you to share the money if you win. And so also I think with Breath Ice Memory, there were instances where people thought I was writing about my mother and all the mothers I was writing about. So I think she had a really terrible, she didn't want to be mistaken for fictional mothers. But my mother was also, my parents grew up during the dictatorship, and sharing your whole life was not a thing. They didn't think that was ever safe.
Right.
And so my mother was always just people don't need to know about me. But I thought, I thought she was so funny, and she was just had so many layers to her life that I thought, that's a I try not to break promises to people who are living, in terms of. But
when they're dead.
Yes. I feel like if I light a candle and really beg for a lot, that it's okay.
Will you read this?
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say about the passage beforehand?
Yeah. So then, also I kept finding things that my mother, after my mother passed away, I kept finding things. My mother was a hoarder. She was definitely a hoarder, and one of the things that was delightful about that was just sometimes finding unexpected things. So, and this was one of them. Years after my mother died, I kept finding some of her belongings around my house. Midway through the essay class, I was taking an essay class with my daughter was taking an essay class, and we were reading things together. So midway through the essay class, while going through a box of old things, I found a wooden machete, a memento my mother brought while she was on a Caribbean cruise. I also found a small book my mother had owned since it was first published by Watchtower Bible and Tract Society in 1979. Comment s'assurer une vie de famille heureuse? The original English title was Making Your Family Life Happy Forever. The text was illustrated with watercolor-like images, including many happy couples and families. The book was one of many Jehovah's Witness tracts given to my mother by her sisters, who'd remained witnesses after my mother became a Pentecostal like my father. The book was padded with 13 old black and white postcard-sized pictures I had never seen before. Based on the timestamps and notes written on the back of the pictures, I figured out that these youthful-looking, elegantly dressed young men and women posing in front of drapes inside professional photo studios were friends from my parents' youth in Haiti. Some they had known separately, and others they came to know together after they were married. Like my parents, many of them were probably long dead. On the front and back pages of this book are the phone numbers of other friends that my mother had jotted down at different times over a number of years. The key to a happy family life was Jehovah. I did not have to read the book to be made aware of this intended message. Still, I did, and in reading it, I found that the only part of the book that was both underlined and highlighted was a reference to the story of Rachel and Jacob. Rachel, a shepherdess, finally married her cousin Jacob after he spent 7 years working for her father to gain her hand. Like me, my mother was a sucker for stories of people kept apart by circumstances beyond their control. On that same page was the only piece of marginalia in the entire book, the words rang social, social class, written in my mother's tiny scrawl. My mother never wanted me to write about her. It made her feel unshielded, exposed. I now understand that protective impulse, something akin to fearing the loss of your soul to the lens of a camera. The older I get, and the fewer places there are to disappear in this all-seeing and all-knowing world, the more I want to hide. the Audre Lorde has warned that what is most important must be spoken, made verbal, and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood. At times, fiction remains my only veil. When I write, I told those young writers in Fondé Blanc, I sometimes break promises both to myself and to others, to the living and to the dead.
I'm a wide-open dreamer, cold-hearted mother, faithless believer in the cruel heart of summer. I am a conquest, a vision, bold indecision, the fullest reduction, the seething, the suction. And I long to be with you, to see you, to kiss you, to softly dismiss you when truth is the issue. Fine suit of leather, a heaving of heather, then birds of a feather from whence came together. And your brother is cedar, your father the leader. He's bent like a maple when weight starts to take hold. Your sister just suffers some unspoken lover, left longing for cover when winter starts coming in fits and in phases. The full moon comes chasing and the blind man is shameless when autumn erases you. A freight train, he's running through my brain, cunning like fever. He's Paul and he's Peter, two hands like mallets, some old cowboy ballad committed to memory. He's guarded by century, and I'm Eve's great deceiver. I'm lying between her, I call you at midnight. I'm waiting by bedside, and she's long and she's winding a song without ending. A garden needs tending, a heart stays unmended too. Often once mentioned a bold apprehension, a faithless devotion, some calm and commotion, for some love of labor, a gift from thy neighbor, a branch that bends deeply, a secret between me, a truth in the attic, a hopeless romantic, laden fruit heavy, a bough in the eddy, and you moving like water, some lambs to the slaughter. I'm guilty and I know it, and I tried not to show it to you.
Laamar. Thank you. You're listening to Talking Volumes at the Fitzgerald Theater with writer Edwidge Danticat. I'm Kerri Miller. Let's raise the lights. And there are microphones out in the audience and people with questions. If you've got a question, please raise your hand. And these guys will, yes, right, Tom, right behind you, right there.
Okay, thank you so much. So in 2005, I was a teenager and I remember reading a local magazine, and there was kind of like very famous Haitian writer, and I remember René Despestre, Daniela Ferrière, Franck Etienne, and I also remember seeing your name. And even though I couldn't read the title of your book, or I couldn't pronounce it, but I for sure could say your name, Edwidge Danticat. And now, 19 years later, so I'm kind of like seeing you face to face, and being in Minnesota, where I also work as a psychiatrist. So my question is, when you grew up as a kid in Haiti, there's that sense of somebody who's living on the other side, Lord Bodlo, it's so foreign. You try to picture, to imagine what it is, and it's difficult. And for me, when I take your book and I see so much of what I grew up with, it's so empowering and so validating. I don't open many books where the first page said, "Pour Patricia." This is very powerful by starting with a Haitian Creole. And for me now, as a psychiatrist, I see the impact of, racism, colonialism, violence in my patients. And sometimes I can feel connection with either what I've seen, and I also want to share something. But there's that fear of, I don't know how much white people or much America will want to read about, about what I see. Or also, I don't know, there's that sense of fear of how much I should share, and or will I be able to do justice to, to all those things. So I would like to have your opinion about those things, so if you have any advice or something you can share. And I don't know. I'm very excited to hear from you.
Thank you. You kind of you have my dream job. So in high school, I used to think I'm going to be a psychiatrist, and then I'll steal all my patients' stories for novels. You can't do that ethically, probably. But it seems like you're struggling with telling your own story. First of all, I'll tell you, the book is called We're Alone. You're not alone in that. I think that fear of, especially with your professional, that layer of your field. But I meet a lot of young Haitian Americans who feel like because of the distance, or because of also we grew up, a lot of our parents, especially people who left during the dictatorship, are very protective of their stories. And I think in some ways we inherited that, that fear of sharing. But the advice I would give you is to write it, and that when we started with the question of audience, that's really how I started writing. I would just imagine, I was just writing it for me. You write with that, you close out other people, and the people we fear most in telling our stories are our families. I was always so grateful that my parents would read the books when they were translated. I was like, oh, at least I have a year to get them prepared. So I would say just write it as though nobody will read it. Write it for yourself, and then that vulnerability, that fear just is erased. Just once you've written down what you have for yourself, then you can think about other people. Because what happens is when we're afraid to write something, it's the thing you're afraid to write is standing in the way of what you could be writing after it, right? And so I would say just start just write it for yourself, and don't worry about others until you've put something down. And you probably, you're a psychiatrist, you know how the mind works. So.
Other questions? I thought I saw somebody with their hand up back in there. No? Really? Okay.
Thanks, and it's so wonderful to meet you. Your process. I mean, you said just write for yourself, but do you write every day? Are you disciplined? You said you like to write at night with the solitude. Do you have a page minimum, a word minimum, or you just go with the flow? It's on, it's off, it's in, it's out.
Yeah. I mean, I'm one of those, like burst writers. Like, so if I have an idea that's like all I want to do 24 hours, but sometimes I can't do that around my life if you have children. So I try to do, my process usually starts with like what Annie Laamar calls the shady first draft. Like I try to do a first draft, and I let it be bad. I try to give myself a perimeter, like this is where I begin, this is where I hope to end, and I try to write towards that. Because I think I always have this fear that sometimes when you have an idea, you start with the excitement of it, and then something can happen, you feel like it's going to slip away. So I just was like, and I'm, sometimes I'll say to my children, I was like, I'm trying to write this before I get hit by a bus. Like I want to get it down. And so like that, I just try to get through a draft. So just that I have something to work with. That's usually my process. And then I go back and I revise and I layer and I sort of grow the thing that I'm writing through revision. And I try to do that around my life. Like I always think of Lucille Clifton, the story of her, writing at red lights. I don't recommend it. It's probably dangerous to others, but you can dictate maybe. But that she was, that to that extent trying to write, you write around the life you have. You try to weave your work around the time that is possible.
The only person I've ever seen do something like that is Joyce Carol Oates.
Yeah.
She carried around these little scraps of paper. She never stopped. Mm-hmm. It was intimidating.
Yeah.
Question.
First, thank you for being here. It's an honor to be in the room with you.
Thank you.
You have such a rich linguistic background with the French, the Creole, and the English, and I'm curious about what language goes on inside your brain on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, thank you. I see it like a couple of years ago. I was deciding. I was like, it's a kind of simultrans, kind of like because often, like when I was writing a book like The Farming of Bones, in which you had all of those languages, including some Spanish, and then I just realized there were moments when the characters were speaking Spanish, they were speaking Creole, and the way like of transmitting that and finding sort of patterns in these different languages to represent like the different ways to differentiate the Spanish speaker from the Creole speaker from the French speaker, and then you also had this sort of linguistic manipulations of how like class of how you were speaking if you were like a owner of a plantation in Dominican Republic versus someone who works there. So that's just the fascination. But for me, I always feel like all of that is coming, and there's like a kind of multilingual UN interpreter in my brain.
Wow.
that it filters through, that it gets it on the page. Yeah.
Another question. Yes, sir.
My mind keeps on coming back to the last presidential debate and what Donald Trump was sort of speaking about in Ohio. And, some of the thoughts I had is just feelings of disappointment, but also fear. But sadness, too, about where our country is right now, and that he is not necessarily speaking for a minority, that the election is so close. And I can't sort of get past that. Like, and I'm curious, like, what some of your thoughts were, like, when you sort of like witnessed that, and what that's saying about the state of our country right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I mean, I think that was brewing days before the debate, and I think to a certain extent, some of us were expecting it. I mean, it was even, before he just threw out, like, they're eating the pets. I mean, there were days before that of, like, of J.D. Vance and the memes. So what saddens me the most about that is that, I think they had the poll recently that something like 81% of, like, his people believe those things. And so the level of dehumanization of people, not just our communities, other communities too, like the fact that people can be dehumanized to a certain extent. And we're in a country with a lot of guns, and I was listening to a town hall that was happening in Ohio by the Haitian Times. It's a Haitian American newspaper, and they had to move it online because of the threats. But there's a gentleman who said he has a business. He's a business owner in Ohio, and he was on this chat where people were saying, well, you all have guns, why don't you take care of it yourselves? Like on this chat that this Haitian man was on. So I think there's just like, we're in a climate where you feel like a precipice can be crossed at any time. So it's not like that you can go from speech to violence so quickly. So that concerns me for the community. You have the white supremacist marches there. The Proud Boys were there this weekend, and what that means if suddenly decide to be like Trump decides to have a rally there, what that means for the residents after he leaves. And so there's just so many, we're in this climate, not just in the political climate, but there's so many things that we hear, like every time I watch the news now, everything is unprecedented, right? It's kind of like like my mother, who was very religious, would say the end times. Like, it's like everything is unprecedented to the point that it's just like, it's very hard not to be like jittery and always concerned about, like, I think that's something you feel like you can be in your bubble and where you are in different parts of the country, but as soon as you step out, that even inside your bubble, but you still, the jitteriness of like things can just go wrong so quickly. And especially like for a community that feels like they're under siege. We have so many terrible precedents. We have the Tulsa massacre, we have Rosewood, where things are set up for this kind of thing, where you set up an aggrieved community and say, this is your enemy, your neighbor is your enemy. There's so much danger in that.
Other questions? Yes, right over there.
Hello. In my work, I'm a teacher of 5 and 6-year-olds and I teach them to write. And I'm an English language teacher for students who are learning English as a second language. And I was curious, in your experience, if you remember the moment, maybe as a child, when you wrote something that you first felt was good and that you were really proud of, and also when you were older and then learning to write in English in America, if you remember that.
Thank you. I mean, I had a wonderful English as a second language teacher in junior when I was 12, Mr. Dusek. And I remember, so when I was in Haiti, my brother and cousins, they just loved what we would call graphic novels now, but they were these sort of westerns, and they loved Tintin, the cartoons. And so we would try to make those, and they would make the stick figures, and I would put the dialogue. So that was my proudest writing until then. And then when I remember, so as soon as when I got to New York, we got there in '81 on a Friday, and on Monday I was in school, March, and so I remember, and then soon after that I got the most terrible case of chicken pox. I think was stress induced. And then when I went back to school, they were like, people like, where were you? And I remember saying, I was sick. And I was like, oh my God, I speak English. And then, and I didn't know where that came from. It was kind of but it was probably from watching Sesame Street for 2 weeks in bed. But my proudest writing, and you can see it online. I joined this paper called New Youth Connections, and I wrote something about like my first day in the U.S. For them, and that really was my first time people shared my writing. But I think it's wonderful that to teach at that age level, to teach writing still, because that's the time where the imagination is so fresh, and there's so much like interweaving of the two languages. Because one of the things I found too, when my girls were little, and I was very, I would go a lot into classrooms, is just in the way for young people that language is still a marvel. It's still beautiful, and especially if they're transposing things from other languages, it's just kind of like when that comes together, it's so exciting and so beautiful. So I think, so kudos to you for doing that work.
One last question down here. Are we doing a signing on the stage? Okay. So after we're done here in just a couple minutes, Edwidge will sign books. There are also signed books for sale, some of the backlist out in the lobby for subtext. Make it a good night for subtext, all right? Buy some of the backlist. All right, question here.
Mine is more of a quick comment. I work as a principal with St. Paul Public Schools. I'm not sure if that would be one of your dream jobs.
I have a brother who's a principal, so
great.
Yes, I know it's hard work.
So back to the comment that this gentleman was referring to after the debate. So the day after the debate, I went back to work, and my AP, my assistant principal, said to me, Jude, I wonder how you felt as Haitian as you were hearing those comments. And I laughed, and I told him, well, we are Haitians. When white supremacists attacked us, we wear it as a badge of honor. And when they keep doing it, it just becomes our favorite suit. We wear it all the time. So that night, I called home. My mom lives in Brooklyn, New York. So I called her, trying to deny it, because it really hurt. But she's a bit older, so I was in total denial, just not talking about it with her. And she brought it up, and she said, Jude, you saw what's going on, what they're saying about us? And she told me quickly a beautiful Haitian proverb in Creole that I'm going to quickly translate here, which means dogs don't bark at broken cars. They only bark at moving cars. We are Haitian, we work, we do beautiful things. That's why they are making so much noise about us. So the reason I wanted to share that with you, I just wanted to say thank you for what you do, not just because you keep promoting the Haitian culture, but you keep writing, and you keep writing beautifully. You keep moving forward. So thank you.
Edwidge, thank you so much for coming. It's just been a pleasure to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci en pile. Thank you.